Hello everybody, welcome to the Man Alone YouTube channel. I'm Man Alone, and today I need to apologize because we're like 5 minutes into Cyber Monday, already past Black Friday. Is there something for Saturday or Sunday? Like, is it like Stampede of Sales Sunday and Sabbath of Blood Saturday? Anyways, I got through all of these super deal days and I forgot to be thankful for Thanksgiving. I'm so ashamed. I'm humiliated. And I wanted to take this opportunity to say how thankful I am for the middle of my RPG bookshelf. These are the middle books. Some of them, I can tell what they are. They have spines. Some of them don't. You know, like some of them, when you pick them up, you just kind of have to like pull them out to see what they are. And it's really great actually because that way I get like little surprises. I'm reminded of them. Like I'll pull out Bilge by Neon Rod or Fallen by Perplexing Ruins, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Bell Whispers. Yeah, some of these are great, and some of these I don't care for, and some of these I really want to like, but I can't. And some of these I dislike. Some of these I haven't played, or I haven't played enough to give a good opinion on them, but I'm thankful for all of them for existing, because the middle of my RPG bookshelf represents to me the refuge, the safety of this hobby. The fact that I am able to get these books, that some of you have some of these, that people make videos about them, that you don't have to be a connoisseur to find these. That is one of the things I am so thankful for, finding this hobby. And the reason I'm thankful for that is because more and more before I found tabletop and specifically solo gaming, more and more I was feeling really despairing about entertainment media, I guess. And I know that seems like a bit of an overreach, but I mean it. I wanted to talk about something in a video that's a little bit hard to talk about. It hits some tender spots for me. I mean, I'll live. Like, it's not like I'm being brave or anything. I'm just sitting in a desk chair right now, but it's a little bit vulnerable, and it's also, well, it's vulnerable in the fact that I have to talk about things that I think some people would say like, oh, that's real. That's so sad. You don't like movies and music anymore. I'll weep for you tonight. So there's that sort of vulnerability of just saying how I feel, and then the vulnerability of like presenting an argument that is very easy to contort and make me look silly. But I think enough people feel the same way that I do, that I think I have the strength to talk about it. And that is that I was a child of the 80s and 90s, and I was raised on TV and Nintendo and movies. And I know that some kids' earliest memories were seeing the Northern Lights, or that camping trip with their dad that they'll never forget, where they went whitewater rafting, or their Eagle Scout badge and stuff. And that just wasn't me. I'm from a family of 7. My parents worked a lot. I am very far from my other siblings, and so I I have a very loving family, but I spent a lot of time in front of screens. And these were the screens that when you touch them, they didn't do anything. They just gave you like a static shock. And because of that, these things were very meaningful to me. Television and movies and video games, they're very meaningful. And they're meaningful to a lot of people. And one of the cruelest things that I see happen very commonly in sort of the cultural milieu, the entertainment milieu, is that these things tell us to be very passionate about them. And they draw us in with their great stories and amazing characters. And then it's like, hey, enter this world, be part of this, care about these people, care about the results of this. And then you do. And then something changes that you don't really like. And you say, hey, I don't like this. It's not what it's supposed to be. And then people quickly code switch on you and go, oh, I'm so sorry that your little video game characters don't, they're not the same as they were when you were growing up with them. And it's like, hey, wait a minute. I thought that I was supposed to buy it. Like, I thought that I was supposed to invest myself in this, right? But then somehow now we're supposed to simultaneously believe that they are both like irrelevant and extremely important, but it just depends on like what the situation is for whether they are a laughing stock or a refuge for some people that shouldn't be touched under any circumstance. And so, that's not any new news here. I think it's a very confusing cultural moment, but I do feel as though there was a shift that occurred that, for me, there was a specific fracture point or severance point at which something started to change in my relationship with those things. And in retrospect, I actually can identify it. And I just want to say in advance of that, what stimulated this video was reading Marc Fisher, who wrote a book that was very influential in my life. It's called Capitalist Realism. In a lot of ways, introduced me to a lot of different thinkers and different ways of viewing the world and understanding what was happening and how there was a very strong machine of people and groups and a lot of forces that really want to make people feel a certain way, and to liberate yourself from that feelings machine. It can be a very lonely process because not a lot of people get it. And the feelings machine also is engineered so that if somebody does question the feelings machine or they don't have the right feeling about something, the feelings machine automatically ostracizes them and it marks them out as like a vulgarity or an alien species that has to be eradicated. And I don't agree with everything that Marc Fisher had to say today. I agree with a lot of it. I would say, I agree with a good deal of it, or I agree with stipulation or whatever. But I always have a soft spot for Marc Fisher because of his very candid writings on depression and his very unique insights into what might be called socio-cultural political philosophy. And I discovered Marc Fisher a few years before he took his own life, which was really, really difficult, even though it was, I never met Marc Fisher. I never even went to see him talk or anything, but it was what do they call it? A parapersonal relationship. But the thing is, when you find somebody who feels and thinks a lot of things like you, and then they make that choice, that's really tough, because it's like, oh, this person, showed me this way of looking at the world, and then I looked through those same lenses and I said, wow, I think you're right. I think things are this way. And then they said, well, I can't stand it. And the same thing happened with, if anyone is familiar with the band Sparkle Horse, Mark Linkus. That was really tough for me as well. It's not something that I wasn't, tearing my tunic and screaming to the heavens, but it was difficult, and it's difficult to integrate that, especially when you're a younger man. And so I return to Mark Fisher a lot. And what's interesting, what gives Mark Fisher a very interesting insight into a lot of things is that, before he was, on top of him, how do I want to say this? The main thing that Mark Fisher was not a philosopher, not a Marxist economist, not a cultural critic, none of those things. He was a music guy, music critic, and he wrote about music, and his lexicon of music, particularly British music, is so massive that, to this day, I still can't read through Ghosts of My Life or Capitalist Realism and fully understand all the references, because there's just so many, niche references to the 1980s British music scene and stuff that some of it goes over my head. But because he looked through the scope of music to analyze culture, he had a very unique insight in that. And one of the biggest insights that Mark Fisher had, and I apologize if anyone already knows this, kind of just be a little bit of a primer, but Mark Fisher believed something that I think you can trace from like Hegel to Frederick Jameson to Mark Fisher, that the world, the society, culture, starting around the mid 2000s, started running out of runway. The ability for subgroups to calcify, like goths or something, like that was very difficult to form, because there was things were just, in the digital era and hyperconnectivity, things moved too fast for any of these movements to calcify into a subculture that had unique clothes and unique look and everything like that. And in addition, like, you had a lot of austerity and neoliberal economic constraints, and the result of this was that we started having a more difficult time imagining the future. And I guess call it like a crisis of future utopian imagination. What Fisher might call futurity. We'd run out of cultural runway because of these economic and social and technological factors. And additionally, the way that we view time as humans is we don't view like the shift, the movement of time consistently. And I mean, if you are over 30, you're probably already starting to notice, because I think that's around when I started to notice that, like, there are things that you say, oh, wow, when did that happen? Like, was that last year? And then it was like, no, it was 7 years ago. I had one of those the other day that I was like, wow, I think I moved into that apartment we used to live in. And I was like, that was like 2 or 3 years ago, right? No, it was 9 years ago. And I was like, what? The way that we actually experience time or have these temporal experiences is by the culture around us. That is sort of the landmarks that form these experiences. And so, if you want right now, you can try to guess in advance of what I say, or it's not like a quiz, but try to imagine when I say, what did clothing look like in the 1970s? You could probably picture that, right? What about music? You can kind of get a feeling for that, right? Can you hear like John Bonham doing a drum solo, right? You hear the sort of like very bright chorus pedaled chords of Pink Floyd with like the lilting, like, right? And now move into the 80s. You can see that, right? The emergence of synthesizers and the oscillator that produced a lot of those sounds, and the clothing. I mean, it's extremely distinctive, and the neons and the polos and how the shoes kind of popped out like right angles from the cuffs of pants. And you can see that, right? And now move into the 90s, and you can see Kurt Cobain, and you can see guys wearing green sweaters that are like a little too long around their wrists, and you can see Doc Martens, and you can hear Stone Temple Pilots and Alice in Chains. Now you move into the 2000s, and it gets a little weird, right? Maybe you see something clothing-wise. Maybe you see, I don't know, rugby shirts, non-pleated khakis, and then movies and music. What was that like? You know, in the 90s, you had a lot of, you had this emergence of synthesized electronica in the 80s. In the 90s, you had grunge, but you also had a sort of synthwave emergence. You had a telepop music, sort of something that was dance music that you'd listen to in your car. And then the 2000s, what was that? You know, whenever I do this, the only thing I could think of is the movie Underworld with Kate Beckinsale. For some reason, feels like the 2000s to me. And then if I were to say the 2010s, well, it's like, well, what the hell was that? You know, like, do you know what the 2010s clothing look was? Was there anything in the 2010s that was comparable to wearing an upside down visor in 1996? In 2020, I mean, that's when things really, Mark Fisher never was in COVID, but that's where things truly, it's the end result is we have what Mark Fisher would say is this atemporal experience where we have a hard time identifying any recent moments in time or distinctive features of that. And so we live in this perpetual present. In the past, he uses a term of hauntology, which is actually by Jacques Derrida from a 1994 book, and I'm definitely not going to attempt to explain Derrida because I don't think I could, nor can anyone except Derrida, maybe. But the idea behind hauntology, which is sort of a French play on words of the word ontology, is that we're never really in one time. The past is always haunting the present. The past reemerges as a specter. And Derrida talked about this in terms of like Marxism as a specter after the Berlin Wall fell. But Fisher used this to talk about how we live in this perpetual present now, that there's no distinct formulation of cultural landmarks. And because of that, we've entered something like a retromania, a nostalgia circuit where everything is a sequel, a remix, a remake, a reimagining, Greek myth, but, you know, with XYZ identities, or the Three Musketeers, except change this feature of them or whatever. And in a way, it's always been like that, right? That there's nothing new under the sun. We always go over, you know, the same stories emerge over and over again. But even there's no signature on it anymore. And the signatures we put on things, you look at something like Stranger Things. Stranger Things is just Goonies, right? It's placed in the 80s. It's this treadmill of nostalgia where we can't establish a new present. And the reason for that is because the future is canceled. And this is what Mark Fisher called the slow cancellation of the future. We're running out of cultural runway, and our ability to think about the future and to think optimistically about the future has diminished. And that's the key point, this optimistic vision, because again, to take a little ride back, in the 1980s and 90s, I did not think the future would be what it is right now. I was very excited for the future. I was excited because I saw movies like Back to the Future 2. I saw Explorers, Flight of the Navigator, Tomorrowland, which was this Disney TV special about, you know, what can happen, exploration, a better tomorrow. The Jetsons, I guess Close Encounters, Space Odyssey was kind of grim, but it still showed, you know, this possibility for a human future with unimaginable growth. Of course, The Next Generation, where we're like post economy, and these were visions of the future that promised something great was going to happen. We were going to be better. We were going to be okay. And of course there was dystopians. Of course there was Blade Runner. You know, these things always exist too, but more and more the positive future visions were replaced by negative future visions, and even positive future visions were secretly dystopian, a sort of Stepford Wives kind of setup where anything that was about a future that was better came at great price. You know, there's some sort of purge hanging in the background, or everyone is being mind controlled, or it's the time machine, right? Like the future is great except for the people that sort of live under the boots of others. And so we lost this ability to imagine a better future because we're stuck in this perpetual present. And this was really, really, I was very depressed about this. I was very depressed about this because I was no longer able to feel excited. And if you think now, look at our films about the future. They're all grim. They're either dystopian or they're utopian in as far as there's going to be a great rebellion, right? That's the closest we get to utopian now, is that there'll be some future society where there is a tyrannical overculture, and then there is a group of people who are constantly fighting against them. But we never see after the fight. It's always a constant, endless struggle. And that is because all these reasons: capitalism, technological development, the commodification of everything. And when I look at movies now, and I look at books that emerge, and I look at TV shows, I grieve. I mean, I do. I was so unbelievably excited for the Star Wars prequels, and even the first one of the new trilogy. And now these shows come out, and at first I didn't pay attention when I watched them, and then I stopped watching all the episodes, and then I stopped watching any of them, and then I didn't even care. I don't even know what Star Wars episodes are out now. How about Marvel? I don't even know what the hell's happening there. And I read Marvel, DC, Vision, Valiant, Image comics my whole childhood, and I have no clue what's happening, and I don't care one bit, because there's something wrong. There is something behind those pieces of media that despise me as the viewer. They despise me. And it's not just me. I'm not saying that's singling me out or even anything to do with my identity or anything like that. It's that I am the consumer. Okay. And so the moment that I believe that this happened, and this is, I think you're going to think I'm pulling your leg here, but I'm not. In 2006, for those of you who were around and were able to get on the internet, this was you have to think of a more naive time. We were some years away from understanding the power that we harnessed, right? The Arab Spring was in 3 or 4 years away. But we were a little bit past the early phases of it, right? Like, again, I don't know if some of you know this, but like the earliest Twitter, you had to like send a text message to Twitter and it would post your tweet. So the time that I realized that the game had changed was when I was watching one of the Resident Evils, and the really bad ones, and Milla Jovovich, who I had since the Sixth Sense, Fifth Element, just had the hugest crush on her, and she was also a lead singer of Pussifer, which was one of Maynard Keenan's other projects besides Tool and Perfect Circle, and she was a babe, and I just was, whatever. I love Milla Jovovich. I still love you, Milla. But I'm sitting, it's like 1 a.m. and I'm eating puffed Cheetos, which is the shameful Cheeto. And there's this scene in Resident Evil where she backflips off her motorcycle and pulls out 2 of her Desert Eagles. Yeah, the director always gave these epic scenes to her. I can't imagine why. But she flips off the motorcycle and has these 2 Desert Eagles and just lights up everybody and then lands on her feet. And I had no idea what I was doing. This was still also in this moment in Twitter where you had to put a period before like a tweet directed at somebody, or else it didn't send it. It only sent it to them. Nobody else can see it. I don't even know if I did that, but for whatever animated me, I really don't know. But I went on Twitter and I was like, I wonder if Milla Jovovich has a Twitter account, and she did. And I tweeted something like, at Milla Jovovich, how come you are doing backflips off of motorcycles and looking awesome, and I'm sitting here eating puffed Cheetos, sad face? And I didn't think anything of it. And then my phone, bing. And I picked it up, and it was like, Milla Jovovich was like, LOL. And I was like, wait a minute, what? Is that some sort of like automatic response? And then I opened it and it was like, LOL, I'm not backflipping off motorcycles all the time, or something like that. And I was like, what the hell just happened? What in the hell just happened? So I'm just going to flip through these just in case you if you're like me and you have a hard time not having a little something extra to do. I said, what the hell just happened? I'm sorry, but in my day, when I was young, the only way that you were going to meet a celebrity, there were 4 ways. The first is out of the question. You become a paparazzi that follows them around all the time. The third is not out of the question, but extremely unlikely, which is that you like enter the movie industry in Hollywood. The second is you write a letter to their agency, and then in 6 or 7 months, they send you some form letter back with their signature. Or the last one, which is the way I met Shaq, is you go to some convention and you stand in a line of 400 people, and then you pay for an autograph. That's the only way I knew. And this was 1:17 a.m. and Milla Jovovich just said something to me, just read what I wrote and responded to me. And I was like, what just happened? It was a shattering of the fourth wall. And I was like, I knew that this was like something. And I remember telling people about this. I said, you're not going to believe this. And they said, no, it wasn't her. It was fake. I was like, no, it was like I don't even know if there's like Twitter verified or whatever, but you could see, she had at the time tens of thousands of followers and stuff like that. And people just didn't get it. And I didn't get it, but I was like, something is really, really different. Okay. And so, okay. So this wasn't the thing though that really changed it. And I promise you, this is going to talk about this, but it's a waffle. So what are we going to do? In 2006, a movie came out. If you were a teen or an adult in 2006, you are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. If you weren't, you are going to say you're kidding me. But I'm dead serious. There's a movie that came out starring Samuel L. Jackson called Snakes on a Plane. And the premise of Snakes on a Plane was that there were snakes on a plane. I looked up the IMDb summary of this movie, and I could not believe it was. He was an FBI agent. Kenan Thompson was in it. Juliana Margulies was a flight attendant. I didn't remember any of that because, again, very naive time. We didn't have like Tim and Eric, awesome show, great job, and all this like weird humor. And so the idea that there was a movie called Snakes on a Plane was so funny that was enough to make it just get like butts in seats. I have no idea what the movie was about, but if you were around back then, you may recall that there started to be a meme. And if there were memes in 2006, everyone knew about them because there were like 4 memes at a time. And this meme was that there was a part of the movie where Samuel L. Jackson, being Samuel L. Jackson and playing the character he plays best, which is the Samuel L. Jackson character, says, "Enough is enough. I am sick and tired of these mother effing snakes on this mother effing plane." Of course, it was the full word, but and this started going around. It's like, oh, I can't wait to see that movie. I think like the modern day equivalent would be when people said about Morbius, it's Morbin time or whatever. But people didn't know that wasn't real. And so people said they thought that was like in the movie. And the filmmakers got wind of this, and they actually brought back Samuel L. Jackson and some of the actors to refilm a scene where he says that enough is enough. I'm going, I forgot exactly what it was, but it was like, I'm going to get these mother effing snakes off this mother effing plane. And they reshot that scene and inserted it into the movie. And I was in the theater and everyone laughed and clapped, and it was so hilarious. And there's not a single thing about the movie otherwise that I remember. Just snakes flying out of, the what do you call those? Like the overhead compartments. And I remember being like, wait, what? Somebody made a movie and then a bunch of, look, it's a frivolous movie. It's a joke. There's no part of me that was like, you shall not violate snakes on a plane. It's a joke, but here's the thing. Whenever somebody makes something, they're showing a little piece of themselves. And it's not up to me to say whether that thing is valuable or not. It's art. That person has shared a piece of themselves. And I know it sounds funny to say that Snakes on a Plane was art, but like, that was art. That was a whole movie. Somebody wrote that. Somebody designed the sets. People acted. For some people, that might have been their big break. And they finished the movie, and then they changed it because people wanted it to be different. And what I realized was that this barrier between the audience and the film industry was narrowing. And I think that this was the worst thing that ever happened to movies, TV, and music. Because the old model was that you had these money people, and they had no idea how to make movies. But they had money, and they wished they knew how to make movies, and they wanted to be involved in movies. And so they took their money, and then they looked around for a director who they thought could make a movie that gave them money. And then they said, here's all my money. And they would occasionally come around and say, oh, make sure that you make a scene where, there's a car chase. And the director would say, yeah, get the hell out of here, right? And sometimes they'd get their way, and sometimes they'd ruin movies, etc. But they would have to trust the singular artistic vision of the director. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it doesn't. But what you get from that is newness. You get something completely, not completely, of course, there's nothing completely new. It's all like rehashing of Gilgamesh or, Arabian Nights, but you get a new vision. And it is around these unique visions that culture calcifies. It is around the fact that, would as I always say, would Kurt Cobain ever win American Idol? No, not a chance. But Kurt Cobain had a vision, an artistic vision, and an interesting voice and an interesting concept, and people really connected to that. And it's the same way, look at Tarantino, right? Pulp Fiction. What the hell is Pulp Fiction? How would anybody have known that a movie where John Travolta, who at the time was not really popular, would have a ponytail and ride around in a car with a MacGuffin suitcase with Samuel L. Jackson, and Bruce Willis was a boxer, and Ving Rhames had some issues, etc. But those are the kinds of beautiful, unique, new things that emerge when the money people can't get close to the audience. They don't know. And so they have to say, here's your check, make a good movie. With this, you also get a lot of average movies, which I also miss. I miss the fact that there used to be movies. There was a movie called Turner and Hooch about Tom Hanks and a slobbery dog. And that movie was one of the most awesomely average movies ever. And it got to exist. And outside of like Lifetime or Oxygen, there's just not going to be a movie like that. Why? Because why take a risk on a movie like that when you can simply go straight to the audience and bypass the unique artistic vision of the director? You could bypass that and go on Twitter and do focus groups and say, what do you want? Or you can even look at SEO, or you can search and say, what do you want? What kind of movie do you want? Oh, you want Thanos? You want Thanos to be back? Okay. What about Thor? Oh, do you want Thor to team up with Hulk? Okay. You want them to fight? Okay. Yeah, we can do that. How about the Silver Surfer? No? Okay. You don't actually like that? Human Torch? No? Okay. Right. And what happens is you start to get Ready Player One. Rather than artistic visions, you get pieces of literature and TV and movies that the delight in watching them is not seeing the unfolding of a story that doesn't all go your way, right? That's another thing. These movies, like every piece of them has to satisfy the audience. There's no troubling moment in the movies. There's no, denouement of Goodfellas where like the drugs come and Hendry starts seeing choppers in the air and you go, I wish the early days could go on forever in this movie, but they didn't because Scorsese didn't want them to, right? Now these movies are these curated emotional experiences, and the delight of them is not seeing what happens because we already know what's going to happen. The delight of them is recognizing things. Ah, that's Hawkeye. Ah, that's Mace Windu. Ah, I know that person. I know that. I know Indiana Jones. I know that. James Bond, right? These are just, we're stuck. We're stuck. And what I realized is I used to be really excited when they would revive these series. And then I just got totally depressed about it because I was like, where's the new Indiana Jones? Not Indiana Jones 4. Where's the new thing that occupies the place of Indiana Jones in our culture that people will want to make a remake of 20 years from now? What's our Indiana Jones? What's our Star Wars? What are the stories of 2020? What are those stories? We don't have any. We just keep going back to the trough and getting stories. If it's not from old movies, it's from old video games. John Wick is a miracle. Because as far as I can tell, John Wick was its own thing. Right? The Matrix 4 was one of the most depressing things I've ever seen in my life. Why? Why do we have to go back? Let it die. Let something new emerge in its place. And that is why I'm thankful for these indie RPGs, because, and especially these solo RPGs, because one of the reasons that I retreated into myself is because I no longer connected with that overculture and of entertainment. And I would say, I think it's stupid. I don't get it. And they'd say, Malone, well, just sit, just enjoy it. It's just a movie. But it's not. It's one of my favorite things. So I just got my favorite things kind of just started sucking, and I just had to take it. And so I just was interested in nothing. Right. And I tried different things. I tried looking at foreign cinema, and I tried looking at cinema from other countries, and there's some really good stuff there. City of God is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. But I felt despair because movies and genres and music are the way that we recognize the passage of time. And so I too felt trapped in this atemporal loop of the forever now. And COVID, my God, I mean, literally you just sat in the same place. And there's something here. There's some possibility here. Let me actually show you the thing that makes my heart glow. 1 second. This exists. UVG exists. Not only does it exist, it really exists, right? Look at this. This gets to exist. This wacky, this thing is, what is it? You know, I look through this sometimes. I go, what the hell is going on here? What kind of game is this? What brain birthed this? It's genius. It's stunning, stunningly beautiful, genius, inspired, and I have no interest in playing it. I don't know why. It's just not my thing. But I adore it. I love it. I will never get rid of it. I don't care if this thing is worth $500 one day. I won't sell it. This is beauty. This is a singular vision. And on top of that, I must say, outside of this current conversation, you just never know with Man Alone. I will pass an RPG and I'll just be like, oh, I want to see you in a different light. And thankfully it happened with Forbidden Lands recently. Pendragon, my gosh. Oh, Mort Borg. And for this reason, we need to guard these things. This is not going to be popular with a lot of people. We need to gatekeep these things. Because one of the things, and I think Frederick Jameson said it, but for some reason I felt like I read it in Capitalist Realism, is that capital consumes, metabolizes, and commodifies everything in its path, including opposition to it. And if you don't believe me, go look up a Pepsi commercial where who's the Kardashian that's not a Kardashian? Well, but whatever, the younger one. It was during like a time of great social upheaval. There was a Pepsi commercial where there were rioters and there were police, and she crossed the line and gave a Pepsi to a riot police in their riot uniform, and they shared a Pepsi, and it solved the riot. That is what capital can do. Now that was a misfire for sure, but look at how many Che Guevara shirts are sold on Amazon, right? Look at how much Jacobin makes from selling like the ABCs of socialism books in full color, socialism for kids. All of the opposition to the superstructure is part of the superstructure. And once they know that there's money to be made somewhere, once they can find a pathway in and consume and repurpose it, the worst part is not that they'll take away your favorite things. It's that they will take over those favorite things and convince you that you're still buying something unique and different. And then they have the reins over it, right? And so I'm not going to pretend that some of these in the pile here aren't part of that. I'm not going to pretend that I'm not part of that, right? And I'm not making this as like a rebellion. The point of this channel, the point of everything I say is not, I'm not here in this lifetime to make that kind of change. What I'm here to do is to help, I hope, people to feel more comfortable in their own skin and to embrace their life. And if you want to embrace your life, you need to find things that are yours. And when you do, protect them. Protect them. I think that the hostility against Wizards of the Coast is warranted. They are not the artists. They're the producers. And I think we need to be maybe a little paranoid about that sometimes and protective of it. Because what I do see in tabletop RPGs and specifically solo play is I see a lot of new stories, and especially solo, it's your story. So it can't even be co-opted unless you get like Clockwork Orange. And so it is this little enclave of us that are creating new stories, and they can't stop us. They cannot stop us because we have this little, this inch of ourselves that they cannot take away. And what I am hopeful of for some of you out there, and that I really want to work on in my own stuff, because right, I love dystopia, I love Mutant Year Zero, you know, I love nostalgia, I love Dragonbane, you know, it's not about that, it's not a moral litmus test like that. But for those of you who create, and those of you who co-create by playing, let's start developing visions of the future again that are beautiful and hopeful and verdant and generative and optimistic. And let's not give in to the forever rebellion. Let's not give in to the forever rainy back alley Blade Runner. The first step to a better future. Imagine how bad, I'm about to say a line right here. Imagine how bad this would go over if I was like doing a stump speech as a politician. The first step to a better future is being able to imagine what that looks like. And sometimes I have a hard time knowing what that looks like. When I was a kid, I couldn't wait. I remember the first time I saw a Palm Pilot, I was like, are you kidding me? What? A computer in my hand? And now, what does that feel like? We have a whole show about the horror of it, the Black Mirror, right? And so I think that we need to recultivate a vision of a future that's happy and beautiful and good. Because if we can't do that, what is anyone fighting for? What is anyone struggling for? And we need to reject the old stories. We need to move on. We must stop. We must break our addiction to these franchises. And we have to start preferencing those things that create new paths, new visions. Look, I know that there's a lot here. Every time I have this conversation, it never goes over well at networking. I don't know. I haven't gone to a networking event. You know, go to a friend's birthday, I start talking about this. And the first thing people want to do is they want to start naming examples that go against what I'm saying. Or if they know me better, they want to give examples of what I do that goes against this. This is not a purity test. All right. We're all wrapped up in this. But the one thing I know for sure is that I'm done with the 80s. Like, can we move on? Can we move on? Can we move on from the past? It was nice. It wasn't as nice as we think. It was nice. That's fun. And we have to stubbornly create these groups. And I think solo role-playing is going to be a small group. I'm not saying that we're solo role players are the goths of the 2020. No, but you really have to struggle to create a community, because the endless rush, the whirlpool of forever present time wants to deteriorate that. It doesn't want anybody to link arms together. And so, yes, thesis, Snakes on a Plane made me depressed. Movies are no longer interesting. Solo RPGs represent to me a field that can be planted and harvested with new crops, but it's going to be all farm hands on deck. So farm hands, get your tractors going. I can't believe that's the end of this video. What a terrible ending. I couldn't have written something down. Wasted all that. Pathetic. Oh, God.